Would you say that Jimmy Page is a little inconsistent? Was Jimmy a little sloppy? This subject seems to keep coming back again, and I have a bit of a different take on it, so let's get into that. But first, let's just talk about the facts. Was he a sloppy guitar player? Yeah, but compared to what? I mean, people like to point out the solo on Heartbreaker, where he clearly duffs some notes, especially at higher tempos. But back in the day, no one cared. I don't think people cared about perfection. It just sounded cool. If you slow down any of the solos, you can do that on YouTube. You can play a Led Zeppelin track on YouTube and you can actually slow it down. And you can listen to where, say, the guitar is, and where the drum sits rhythmically, and where the bass sits rhythmically. And you'll hear they don't always line up. The drums are sometimes a little behind, Jimmy's sometimes a little ahead, and the bass somewhere maybe right down the middle. But so what? That's not how we listen to music, is it? We don't listen to music slowed down unless you're trying to find some hidden satanic message in it. We listen to music at the speed as it was recorded by real human beings, because that's what it was. That group, Led Zeppelin, was an incredible group of human beings. And no matter how many duff notes Jimmy played, they always had an incredible groove. They always filled every song with emotion and excitement, pushing boundaries and taking risks. Yes, at one point, Eddie Van Halen was quoted as saying, "I've never seen him play well live. He's sloppy. He plays like he's got a broken hand and he's 2 years old." Now, in defense of Eddie, yeah, that was true at times. And we all know, many of us have probably heard some of the live recordings where Jimmy was very sloppy. But even Jimmy Page once said, quote, "I'm not a guitarist as far as a technician goes. I deal in emotions." But today in 2024, we correct everything. We can take dozens of takes of a recording. We can punch in certain notes. We can even just adjust the rhythm of one little note, just a tiny, tiny bit, so that everything is perfect. But is it perfect? And that's not even mentioning what auto-tune can do, right? But that's not rock and roll. That's not taking risks. And rock and roll is taking risks. Extending out live performances, never knowing in advance just how long a solo is going to be, or even how long the song is going to be. And if you play in a band like that, you're taking risks. There's going to be some errors. I mean, listen to some of their live recordings like Dazed and Confused that go on way longer than the original. When you take risks, there are going to be some errors. Now, some of this is genre specific. In the 1980s, we saw a lot of players with incredibly brilliant technical ability. And then in the 1990s, it kind of went more back to emotion, in this case, depression mostly. I always find it curious that they've often put Kurt Cobain on the list of top 100 guitar players of all time. Now, I love Nirvana. I grew up listening to that. But it is kind of funny, right? This is so different from, say, Jimmy Page to Eddie Van Halen to Kurt Cobain. But that's music. It's not always about speed and accuracy. Sometimes it's about being expressive and maybe just having a great sense of rhythm, of groove and time feel that's appropriate to the song you're playing. And often that's not staying exactly on the rhythmic grid. In fact, if you record yourself and then you snap your playing to the grid, as they say, in most cases, it just doesn't actually sound that cool. It doesn't groove. And if that's true, is there such a thing as good sloppy? We could compare this to later musicians. Let's say not just the 1980s, but let's say today. Technique has gotten so much better today. It's kind of crazy. Like here on YouTube, you can find hundreds of thousands of incredible guitar players who can really shred. Today, we live in a bit of a show-off culture, I'd even say, right? Especially on social media where it's about playing something impressive and perfect. But remember, they can do a lot of takes before they get it there. And now here's a different spin on this that I haven't heard before. It's a little bit like sports to some degree. No one in the 1960s could run as fast as athletes can run today. Now I guess today there are drugs involved, but come to think of it, there are drugs involved for Jimmy Page as well. Perhaps they just weren't performance-enhancing drugs. But still, the point stands. Sports have gotten so much better in terms of technical ability, in terms of speed and strength. And maybe you could say that the technical ability of the average pro musician today is very high. Extremely high, really. But even with that, groove is always the most important thing. Groove always wins against grid. So perhaps we could say that sometimes live, especially when soloing and at higher tempos, yeah, he could get a little sloppy. Definitely you hear some of those duff notes sometimes. But you could also say he was a master of the riff for rhythm guitar playing. I mean, he's really unmatched at the time. So many incredibly memorable riffs that he wrote and played. And to say that Jimmy wasn't technical, I would disagree. I mean, just look at how clever he was back in the day. Look at the way he thought about making solos. It's not just always the same old thing. Now, I agree he may have played this lick 100,000 too many times. But he also knew how to mix major and minor pentatonic, just for example, like adding the major third back into minor pentatonic. Or one of my favorite examples, nailing that F note over and over in the solo to Stairway to Heaven. Now remember, F isn't in the A minor pentatonic scale. A minor is A, C, D, E, G. But there's an F chord in the Stairway to Heaven solo underneath. So we want that F note, right? And Jimmy knew that. That's why he played those notes. If you learned that solo, you'll see there's that note that's not in the pentatonic. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in detail this week on our Patreon group. So you can check that out. You can get 7 days for free. My name is Blue Morris, and I teach guitar lessons right here in Vancouver, on YouTube, and on Patreon. And I've got books on Amazon too if you want to check those out. Thanks a lot, everyone. We'll see you in the next one.